Hey guys, this video is over the characteristics of living things. This is the introduction to cells. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is what living things need to have in order for them to be characterized or be categorized as a living thing, right? And what they need to have is GRACE, or the acronym, as you can see, GRACE, GRACE, right? Every letter stands for something, and we're going to go over them in this video so that you know what these characteristics are. Okay, we're also going to talk about the cell theory and some of the scientists that contributed to that theory. Okay, so the first thing, or the G in GRACE, stands for grow or growth. And what this means is that animals have to grow and they have to repair themselves, right? So if you're a living thing, you're going to grow, you're going to repair yourself if you have an injury. And you're also going to develop and change or evolve throughout your lifetime. Okay, you don't look exactly the same as you looked when you were a baby. So you have developed, you have changed over time, which means you've evolved over time or your life. Okay, so again, that's the first G in GRACE, is growth, and that's something that living things have as a characteristic. Another thing is the R, which is reproduce, and what that means is that organisms self-renew, right? And also, if they're living things, then they must have a lifespan and they must die. So they have everything that's living eventually dies. Okay. Now we reproduce; they make more of each other. In humans and animals, plants, whatever is living, they reproduce, or at least they have the ability to reproduce. Not all of them reproduce, but they have the ability to do so. Another thing is that we can only come from pre-existing life. So life comes from life. Okay, if it's a living thing, then it came from a living thing. Okay, and we call that biogenesis. Living things also contain DNA. Okay, which is a biomolecule that we talked about is actually nucleic acid, and it's made up of nucleotides. And DNA is the molecule that stores all of our genetic information. Okay. It doesn't transport. It's located in the DNA, in the nucleus, and it stores all genetic information. Okay, living things also adapt. They adapt to their environment and they maintain balance. They maintain something that we call in biology homeostasis, meaning they keep everything balanced. We maintain homeostasis by keeping our internal temperature at a very stable 98.45. And when we start sweating, then we are actually cooling down our bodies. Or when we start working out, we sweat, cool down the body. Or when it's really cold outside, we start shivering to maintain temperature inside of our body, right? So again, that's homeostasis, keeping equilibrium. They adapt. Organisms also adapt and can respond to their surroundings and evolve as a population. We'll talk more about that when we get to evolution, but for now we need to know that living things do adapt to their surroundings so that they're able to survive. This is an example that we showed in class, but all it is showing this bird. Just because it wants to look like that, it's not going to look like that, right? Unless, for just some strange reason, a mutation shows up and this bird is able to survive better than the others, then eventually all these birds are going to start showing up, and that's how they're going to look, right? But that's adaptation, and we'll talk about that later. Another thing, and one of the most important things of living organisms, is that they're made up of cells, which is the basic building block of life. Okay, and cells are made up of the biomolecules that we talked about last time, okay, which are carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. Okay, you need to remember those. You need to know that depending on the structure of the cell, that's going to be the function. The function depends on the structure. Okay, as you can see here, this one right here is a red blood cell. Okay, this one, and this is a white blood cell, and they look different because they have different functions. Okay, so depending on the function depends on the structure. Okay, the last thing that we'll talk about as a characteristic of living things is energy. Okay, living things use energy to go through any function or any chemical process that they have to go through in their bodies, that their bodies have to go through, or whatever they have to do. Okay, we have to be able to metabolize food that we eat, break down molecules, put molecules together, So we need to use energy. So if it's a living thing, it's gonna be using energy. Okay, different ways of obtaining energy, such as photosynthesis or us eating our own food, but we're gonna be using energy. Okay, so again, living things have grace, GRACE, which means they grow, they reproduce, they adapt, they are made up of cells, and they use up energy and they obtain that energy in different ways, and we'll talk about that. Now, all these cells, all the cells in your body, okay, when they start off, they're called stem cells, right? And those are cells that have no job, no function at the beginning. But as they mature, they become specialized. They differentiate. They become something, they get their own job. So if we think of stem cells as unemployed cells, as they mature, they get their job and they start doing that job for the rest of their life, right? And when they start specializing, they're going to start changing their shape because remember, function depends on the shape of the cell. So when cells differentiate, they change their structure, thus having different functions. Okay, so they're going to have different functions. Structure is equal to function. That's a big one. Another thing is, again, stem cells become many types of cells, and this is just another picture that's here that you can use to kind of to see how stem cells can become different cells. Okay, nerve cells, red blood cells, muscle fiber cells. So they all become specialized and they get their own job. In this example, you can see the red blood cell here. Okay, we talked in class and we said that the red blood cell, okay, is the only eukaryotic that doesn't have a nucleus, and you need to make sure to write that down in your notes. Okay, and the reason it looks kind of like a donut is because it's responsible for carrying oxygen around in your body, or the hemoglobin, right, around your body, so it needs that space. White blood cells look like that because they are the ones that fight off infections, and they need to be able to ingest these viruses or release enzymes that can kill up the virus, that can destroy viruses and bacteria. Okay, so all of them have different structures. This one's a fat cell, and you can see how big it is and all the space in between there. That's it's got to be big and it's got to look like this because fat cells, their function is to store fat. Neurons, as you can see, they have a lot of connections here. They're elongated because they're used for signaling, right? So what happens is the signal comes through here, goes through the axon, and comes out through the axon terminals. And it looks like that because it's made for signaling, okay? Again, they all have different functions. They all look different, okay? Now, the idea of cell theory started here, okay, with Robert Hooke back in '65. He started looking at cork and whatever the structures that he saw on the microscope, he called the structures cells because he thought they looked like prison cells or jail cells, okay? Then this guy came about, Leeuwenhoek, in '74 and started looking at animal teeth and different structures of the animal. Okay, he looked at them under the microscope and he called what he saw, okay, animalcules. He called them, he said that animals were made up of these things called animalcules until Schleiden showed up and he said, well, he's looking at animal parts, I'm going to look at plant parts. And once he started looking at plants, he realized that plants were also made up of cells, so he said plants are made up of plant cells, and that's where plant cells came about, right? And then Schwann also started looking at cells, but instead of focusing on plants, he focused on animals, and he called those animal cells. Instead of animalcules, he called them animal cells. And then Rudolf Virchow, and he stated that all living things came from other living things. Just like we said earlier, living things can only come from other living things. And that's how the cell theory came about. Okay, they put all their research together and they came up with these 3 key points. 1, cells are the basic units of life. 2, all living things are made up of cells. And 3, new cells are produced from existing cells. So again, there's a lot of history of how cells, the name cells came about and how the cell theory came about, but just putting the research of those 5 guys together, they were able to come up with these 3 basic points, okay? Again, make sure you know and make sure you understand the characteristics of life, which are grace. Make sure you understand the what the key points of the cell theory are, and make sure you're able to make sure you know what stem cells are, and that the structure of the cell always determines its function.